Hi, everybody. My name is Lynne McTaggart. I'm author of a number of international bestsellers, including The Field, The Intention Experiment, The Bond, and my latest book, The Power of Eight. I'm sure you've heard a lot about all of those amazing pieces of machinery, all those incredible technological advances that are going to take us to the next stage of our evolution. Everything from artificial intelligence to driverless cars to spacecraft that can take us to distant galaxies. But I'm here to talk about how you are more powerful, more miraculous than any machine, and that you have latent powers inside you that you can tap and utilize to evolve yourself. You don't need a single piece of equipment to create an extraordinary, miraculous life and the next stage of your own evolution. So I want to describe to you why this is possible. And it has a lot to do with the fact that we've been told an outdated story. Now, many things write our story: religion, philosophy, many things. But the most pervasive hand in our understanding of ourselves is science. Science writes the story we live by because it writes the story of who we are, and from there we determine how we're supposed to live. And our scientific story up until now has been a very outdated one, an old story. So I want to compare what we've been told to the latest information coming out about science that demonstrates how spectacular you are and how you can unleash this hidden capacity to evolve yourself. So to do so, I want to share some slides with you. And what I want to talk to you about is the fact that there is no such thing as a thing. Now, the scientific story that we've been described and we understand is our science, our story, has to do with our understanding of the world as a machine, essentially one big, well-behaved machine operating according to fixed laws in time and space. We also think that we are one more machine like this, that we operate according to chemistry, that we're a very well-contained and very well-behaved entity ourselves. We believe that we are built via our genes, that we have a blueprint to live out our lives, and our genes are the only master builder. In fact, we are enthralled to them. And we believe that if we're going to affect something else, we're going to influence them, we have to use physical force. We have to freeze it, drop it, burn it, or give it a good swift kick. We have to do something physical to it. We believe that information is received only through our five senses, and that our brain contains consciousness, contains all of our feelings, all of our emotion, our memory, our senses, all input happen via the brain. We believe that time is a one-way arrow from cradle to grave. Now, this worldview assumes a number of things. It assumes that the universe is made of things, that we ourselves are an individual thing, that we're the masters of our fate, that our mind equals our brain, and that our thoughts are entirely our own. They are locked inside our skull. So let's go through a few of these. First of all, the idea that the universe is made of things. Now, as long as there's been science, scientists have been hunting for what I like to call the thing. And that is the very smallest thing out of which everything else derives. Because they figure if they can find the littlest things in the world, they can then define the big things. So for a while there, when they discovered what has been called the Rutherford atom. That's the model of the atom. They congratulated themselves on finding the smallest things. They had the atom and they had all of the things around it. And then they discovered there were subatomic particles inside, things like protons and electrons and neutrons. And then when they looked a little closer, they found even smaller subatomic particles. They found things like gluons and muons and Higgs boson particles, and all kinds of a whole laundry list of subatomic particles. And they keep looking, and like looking inside a Russian doll, they keep finding smaller dolls inside. And the main reason they can't find that very thing, that smallest thing, is that there is no such thing as a thing. That when the closer you look at matter, the closer you peer inside, the more you understand that subatomic particles aren't a thing at all. They're just a poof of vibratory nothingness. In fact, they're actually a trade of information. Now, a physicist, an American physicist called Hal Puthoff, had a eureka moment. He said to himself one time, what if empty space weren't really empty? So he started thinking about something that was well known in quantum physics, but essentially disregarded. It's called the zero-point field, and it is the energy that occurs in empty space between subatomic particles. What you have to understand about subatomic particles essentially is that they're waves as well as particles. Now, if you ask what a wave is, think of an electromagnetic field. They are electric and magnetic fields that intersect and send out waves at the speed of light. They look a little bit like this. This is a nice little drawing of it. But when we're talking about the field, we're talking about waves, and they're also particles that trade energy. So think of quantum fields like an endless game of tennis. Each subatomic particle is sending back energy back and forth to other subatomic particles. Now, that's not very big. That energy exchange is kind of half a watt's worth of energy. And it also occurs at a really short time, 10 to the minus 10 to the 23rd seconds. That's, far less than the blink of an eye. But in that particle exchange, they exchange energy. And when you think about all the subatomic particles exchanging energy back and forth with other subatomic particles, you come up with this unfathomable amount of energy just sitting there in empty space like some supercharged backdrop. In fact, if you were sitting a yard away from me, there's so much energy in empty space that that space between us would be enough to boil all the oceans of the world. It's that energy dense. So there's two interesting things about these waves out there. First of all, they encode information. When they bump into each other, they take on the other's information. They also have an infinite capacity, nearly, to store information. And waves theoretically go on to infinity. So there's some really interesting things about the zero-point field. And by the way, that's the equation for it that scientists use. But here's what they do. When they're writing their equations and they include the zero-point field, they cut it out. They extract it. And to me, that's a little like extracting out God. So the zero-point field is essentially a virtual filing cabinet. Waves can hold 280 quintillion bits of information. That's this. It's 28 followed by 19 zeros. So with waves, the whole of the Library of Congress, which has every book there is, could fit onto a sugar cube. That's how amazing they are. So we are sitting here with this incredible memory bank, an information and connection headquarters that we ourselves are connected to. So theoretically, we have access to all information from all time, and we are literally connected to the furthest reaches of the cosmos. So the zero-point field is an amazing repository of information that we can connect to. So when we talk about a thing, what we have to talk about is essentially a vibrating energy trade. Now, the other idea that we carry is that we're individual things and that we are created by this master blueprint called DNA. Now, we thought that until the work of people like Dr. Randy Jertel, and of course, all of the amazing discoveries that Dr. Bruce Lipton has discovered in epigenetics. Now, Dr. Jertel is just one interesting experiment demonstrating this. He is an expert in genetic mutation. And one of his graduate students came to him one day and said, what if we could override genetics? And to do an experiment like that, they had to come up with a genetic aberration. So they came up with doing an experiment with a little animal called agouti mice. An agouti mouse is the one on the left that is has a certain genetic defect, rendering it peach-colored and hugely obese. Now, the thinking in science has been that once you have an agouti mouse, you always have an agouti mouse because all of its offspring are also going to be agouti mice. So what they wanted to do was to see if they could override that genetic mutation. One of the problems agouti mice have is in processing vitamin B. So what the scientists did was take a bunch of pregnant agouti mice and give them vitamin B, extra vitamin B. And when they came to term, lo and behold, a large number of their offspring came out as normal, brown, slim mice. Now, when Jertel and his colleagues published this study, it rocked the scientific world because it said, we can override genes. And we found that with many human studies. Now, there was a very interesting study from America called the Women's Health Initiative. It involved hundreds of thousands of women. And the idea was to study women taking HRT to demonstrate once and for all that it's safe, that it doesn't cause cancer. That's not what happened. In the midst of the study, there were so many excess cases of cancer among women taking HRT that they had to call a halt to the study. Now, other researchers, even though the study wasn't completed, felt that this was a gold mine of information to pour through for other studies. So a batch of other researchers wanted to look at some of this data to see whether there was an excess of breast cancer among women who had a familial history of it. Their families had an excess of breast cancer. So they looked and they combed through all of these hundreds of thousands of records, and what they found was nothing like that. Familial histories of breast cancer didn't necessarily predispose women to breast cancer. The only thing that mattered that caused an excess of breast cancer was whether they took HRT. So this is not surprising if you know epigenetics, because what you recognize is that our genes are essentially like the keys of a piano. They sit there quietly waiting to be played. And what plays them are environmental influences. They have an effect on a quartet of atoms that sit above the genes called the epigenome. And they are affected by all sorts of things: the food we eat, the water we drink, the air we breathe, the friends we have, the sum total of how we live our lives. That affects that quartet of atoms, and they in turn turn on or off genes. So in this instance, what affected these women was HRT. HRT essentially turned on cancer. So this really means is something very profound. We're not built from inside out, from our genes outward. We're built from outside in. We're built because of our bond with our environment. We also think that we are self-contained entities in lots of other ways, that we're the master of our fate. But new evidence shows that planets and magnetic fields and geomagnetic effects from planets have a profound effect on all living things, including human beings. In fact, the sun has been called the Zeitgeber, which is German for timekeeper, because it has such profound influence on us. Here's one of those influences. Think of the sun as a big old ball of gases, crossed with a lot of magnetic fields. That is a recipe for periodic explosions, and that's exactly what's happening in this picture. There's a solar flare happening, and it's getting hurled toward Earth. It's picked up by the solar wind and hurled toward Earth, where it hits our geomagnetic shield, which surrounds the Earth. And even though it's a faint effect, it has a profound effect on all living things, particularly human beings. When there's a lot of solar flares, it has a profound effect on the two energetic systems of the human body, the heart and the brain. When there's a lot of solar activity, heart attacks increase, psychiatric admissions increase, epileptic fits increase. We get energetically destabilized. And things like this happen to animals too. Homing pigeons can't find their way home. So we are profoundly affected by the sun, by everything around us. So essentially, what this means is there is no such thing as a thing, that we are all connected, so interconnected. Our connection is so integral and profound, it's impossible to say where one thing ends and another thing begins. So that is the story of why there's no such thing as things. Please join me for the next session when we'll talk about how we are energetic systems and what that actually means. So thank you for listening. Until next time.